A young woman was kicked out of a luxury car dealership. No money, no car, and a child clinging to her side. In the cold rain, she had nowhere to go. Until a quiet man opened the door of a small-town cafe and pulled out the empty chair by the window. Sometimes a chair isn't just a chair. It's a second chance, a shelter, a beginning. If you believe that even the smallest acts of kindness can change a life, tap like and subscribe. The next story might just be the one that stays with you forever. The mornings in Elmbrook arrived slowly, like old friends too polite to barge in. The maple trees had just begun to turn, painting the sidewalks in warm hues of ochre and rust. A fine mist still lingered in the air, clinging to window panes and porch rails like it wasn't ready to let go of summer. Nate Hollis sat in his usual spot at Hazel's Hearth, a modest cafe that had somehow survived both gentrification and time. His fingers wrapped around a mug of black coffee, steam curling past the creases of his weathered face. Across from him, as always, sat the empty chair. It had been 6 years since his wife Callie was taken from him. 6 years of silence over breakfast, 6 years of pretending he didn't glance toward the chair to see if she might just appear. Nate never let anyone sit there. Not even Lucas, his 10-year-old son, who instinctively took the seat by the wall instead. That chair belonged to memory, to what once was. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly as someone left. Nate barely noticed. His attention had drifted across the street to the gleaming facade of Brentley Motors, a dealership known more for its pretension than its cars. A woman stood near the showroom entrance, clutching a thick folder in her arms. She wore a worn coat, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. Her chestnut hair was pulled back hastily and her boots were soaked from the morning drizzle. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 5 years old, holding a threadbare stuffed rabbit. The woman was clearly arguing with a man in a suit who gestured toward the sidewalk, his voice loud enough for Nate to hear fragments through the cafe window. "We're not accepting applications in person. Ma'am, you're not a client." The woman's posture stiffened, but she said nothing. She turned slowly, took her daughter's hand, and walked away from the dealership. Not quickly, not angrily, just heavily. They stopped under the narrow awning of the dry cleaners next door, sheltering from the rain that had begun to fall in earnest. The girl clung to her mother's coat, glancing up with wide eyes. The woman crouched to speak to her hand trembling as she tucked a wet strand of hair behind the girl's ear. Nate looked down at his coffee. It was lukewarm now. He told himself to stay seated. Not your business, not your story. But then, his gaze slid toward the chair across from him. It looked different today, less like a shrine, more like an invitation. With a quiet breath, Nate pushed the chair back. The bell above the cafe door chimed again as Nate stepped into the rain. He crossed the street without an umbrella, rain spotting his flannel shirt. The woman looked up. As he approached, wary but not frightened, the girl pressed closer to her leg. "There's a warm cup of something waiting across the street," Nate said, his voice low and even. "And a seat by the fire, if you want it." The woman blinked, as if trying to understand why a stranger would offer kindness. "We're fine," she said quickly, her voice hoarse. "Sure," he said. "But if you change your mind, I'm just over there. Hazel's." He turned and walked away without another word. Back inside, Hazel, the cafe owner, raised an eyebrow as he returned. "That was new," she said, pouring him a fresh cup without asking. Nate gave her a half shrug. "It's a rainy morning." Minutes later, the door opened again. The woman stepped in, her hair dripping slightly at the ends. She carried her daughter, who clutched the stuffed rabbit tightly. Nate stood and gestured to the empty chair. She hesitated for just a moment, then took the seat. "Thank you," she said softly. "Name's Nate," he offered. "Elena," she replied, brushing hair from her face. "This is Lily." Hazel approached with a warm smile and 2 mugs. 1 coffee, 1 cocoa. "On the house," she whispered. Elena wrapped her hands around the cup, nodding in gratitude. Lily sipped carefully, her tiny hands barely fitting the mug. Her eyes lit up. No one spoke for a while. The rain tapped gently against the window. The fireplace crackled. Something like peace settled into the air. Thin, cautious peace, but peace, nonetheless. Nate studied Elena quietly. She had the look of someone used to keeping herself small, someone who'd been told more than once she was asking for too much just by existing. But there was a quiet resilience in the set of her jaw, in the way she sipped the coffee without apology. "I saw what happened," Nate said finally. "Over there. They said I wasn't the right fit," Elena murmured, a touch of bitterness beneath her composure. "Guess a tired woman with a child and no car doesn't inspire luxury branding." Nate didn't smile. "Maybe they're the ones who don't fit." Elena looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, something shifted in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but the recognition of another soul who'd been scraped raw by life. Lily had fallen asleep against her mother's side, cocoa still in hand. "I'll get her a napkin," Elena whispered, reaching for her bag. "No rush," Nate said. "She looks safe." Elena nodded and a quiet breath escaped her lips. Safe. That was rare. Later, as they rose to leave, Elena turned to Nate. "Thank you. I don't usually accept help. I don't usually offer it," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "Maybe. We both broke a rule today." After they left, Nate remained in his seat. Hazel passed by, wiping a table. "That chair's been empty a long time." "Yeah," Nate said, glancing at it. But today it didn't feel so empty. The morning after, Nate found himself sweeping the back corner of the garage with more care than usual. Dust danced in slivers of light that slipped through the skylight overhead, and the old floor creaked beneath his boots like it hadn't been stepped on in years. He didn't usually bother with that part of the shop. It was where unused shelves leaned. Half-empty paint cans sat forgotten, and the air smelled faintly of rust and wood glue. But today, he swept. The night before, after Elena and Lily left the cafe, he watched them from the corner window as they disappeared down Main Street. No car, no umbrella, just the two of them, arms around each other in the rain. He hadn't asked where they were going. It didn't feel like his place. Now he couldn't stop wondering if they'd found shelter. At lunchtime, Nate stood in line at the diner across the street, balancing 2 sandwiches and a thermos of soup in his hands. When he turned to leave, he nearly ran into a small shape, bundled in a yellow raincoat. "Hi," Lily said, her voice soft and unsure. Elena stood just behind her, one hand on the child's shoulder, the other clutching a reusable canvas tote. "We didn't mean to interrupt," Elena said quickly, her cheeks coloring. "Lily remembered you. She just wanted to say thank you." Nate looked at the girl, who clutched the stuffed rabbit tightly in one hand and twisted her raincoat zipper with the other. "You're welcome," he said. "You both dry off okay last night?" Elena nodded. "We found shelter at the church on the edge of town. They let us stay in the community room." Nate hesitated. He wasn't a man prone to speaking quickly or boldly, but something inside him stirred, something older than impulse, deeper than manners. "I have space at the garage," he said, surprising even himself. "It's not much, just a side room I used for storage. But it's warm and it locks. You could stay there for a couple nights if you wanted, just until you get your bearings." Elena blinked. "We don't want to impose." "You're not," Nate said. "It's just a room and a bit of soup, that's all." She studied him a moment longer, and he could tell she was doing that mental calculus, risk versus safety, pride versus survival. Then she nodded. "Just a couple of nights." That evening, Nate moved some old tools, swept again, and brought in a small cot from his attic. He set it up with clean linens. Lucas peeked into the room, leaning against the doorway. "Is someone moving in?" he asked. "Temporarily," Nate said. "Just a mom and her little girl. They needed a place." Lucas didn't say anything at first. Then, Where will they eat? With us. The boy nodded slowly, then wandered back toward his bedroom. Nate didn't miss the way his fingers trailed along the wall, his quiet way of thinking. Dinner was simple: grilled cheese, tomato, soup, and 2 small bowls of fruit Nate had sliced while trying to act like it was no big deal. Elena and Lily arrived just as the sky darkened into soft blues, and the first stars appeared above the tree line. They ate at the kitchen table, Nate, Lucas, Elena, and Lily, all 4 seated under a single warm bulb that hummed faintly when the wind picked up. Lily sat next to Lucas, watching him with curiosity. Lucas, for his part, didn't speak much, but he passed her the napkin when she dropped hers, and she offered him a crooked smile in return. After dinner, Elena offered to wash the dishes. Nate didn't argue. He stood by the window, looking out at the small gravel driveway, arms folded across his chest. He could hear Lily's giggle in the background. Lucas said something, too low to catch, but it made her laugh again. "She's always been like that," Elena said softly from the sink. "Light in the middle of messes." Nate glanced over. She was drying her hands now, the dish towel hanging loosely in her grip. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." They sat in the living room with mugs of tea. Lucas had already disappeared into his room. Lily was curled up in the cot, her stuffed rabbit nestled under her chin. Elena leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I used to have a job," she began. "A good one. Office management at a regional firm. I wore heels, had a badge that beeped when I walked through glass doors." Nate waited. He didn't interrupt. "Then I got married," she continued, smiling without humor. "He was charming, confident, until he wasn't. He didn't like that I had opinions, or money, or a voice." Her eyes drifted toward the wall, not quite seeing it. "He took everything when he left. The car, the house, and eventually, my reputation. He said I ran off with our daughter, said I was unstable. I wasn't, but I didn't have the power to fight him in court, so I ran." She glanced at Nate. "That's why I don't stay in one place too long." Nate let the silence stretch, respectful. Then he said, "Lucas was 5 when Callie died. Car accident. I was supposed to pick her up from work that day. I got held up." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Elena nodded once, slowly. Sometimes the things we carry aren't things at all. Outside, the wind brushed against the eaves. A branch tapped lightly on the window pane. Inside, the light glowed warm and gentle, casting long shadows that didn't feel quite so lonely tonight. They sat in quiet for a long time, just 2 people who'd been cracked open by the world, trying to hold something steady for the sake of the small souls asleep down the hall. When Elena finally stood, she paused at the doorway to the guest room. "Thank you, Nate." He looked up. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know, that's what makes it harder." The side room at the back of Nate's garage had once been used for storage, but over the next few days, it began to shift in character. It still smelled faintly of old motor oil and cedar, but the addition of soft blankets, a small lamp, and a handmade drawing taped to the wall gave it something it hadn't known in years. Presence. Lily had drawn it. A picture of a tall man with messy hair, a woman with brown eyes, a boy with a baseball cap, and a little girl holding a rabbit. They all stood under a crooked roof, smiling. Above them, she'd written in uneven letters, "My new house, just for now." Elena had cringed slightly when Nate first saw it, but he'd smiled, touched the drawing with the tips of his fingers, and left it exactly where she'd taped it. Each morning, Nate made breakfast the same way he always had: eggs, toast, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The only difference was that now, the house smelled of something more than just food warmth. Not the kind that came from heat, but the kind that came from motion, from voices, from the gentle clink of dishes in the sink. Lucas remained cautious. He wasn't rude, but his quiet nature grew quieter still with strangers in the house. He avoided eye contact with Elena and barely spoke to Lily, though he didn't protest her presence either. Most days, he spent his time sketching cars or working quietly in the corner of the garage where Nate had set up a small workbench for him. One afternoon, Nate found him sanding a block of pine into what looked like the rough shape of a truck. "You're good with your hands," Nate said, setting down his wrench. Lucas shrugged. "She asked if she could color it when it's done." The boy mumbled. Nate blinked. "Lily?" Lucas nodded, not looking up. "She likes yellow." Nate turned away before his smile gave too much away. That same evening, Nate walked into the kitchen to find Elena wiping down the countertops, a dish towel looped over her shoulder. The air smelled like cinnamon. She'd baked something. He hadn't asked what, but the scent had soaked into the walls, softening every edge. "You don't have to clean," he said gently. "I know," she replied, "but I can't sit still when things are out of place." There was a pause. "Me either," Nate said. They shared a glance across the counter, a brief flicker of mutual understanding. As the week wore on, Elena began helping out in the garage. During the day, organizing spare parts, labeling drawers, sorting bolts by size and type. She was efficient, quiet, and asked good questions. Customers began noticing her, then greeting her. Some even started chatting. "She's got presents," Hazel said one morning when she stopped by with donuts. "Doesn't matter if she's got fancy clothes or not. That kind of calm, folks lean into it." Nate had simply nodded, biting into a jelly-filled pastry to avoid saying too much. But Hazel, sharp as ever, added, "You've stopped drinking your coffee alone." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. One Friday afternoon, a soft rain began to fall. Not the kind that rushed or thundered, but the kind that whispered against the windows. Lily stood barefoot by the door, watching droplets race down the glass. "Do you think rain can talk to trees?" she asked Nate suddenly. He paused from wiping grease off his hands. "I think it's the only thing trees ever really listen to," he said. Lily smiled, then ran to tell her mother. That night, after Lily had gone to bed and Lucas had disappeared with his headphones, Nate and Elena sat out back under the awning, sipping tea and listening to the soft tap of rain on tin. "I used to dream of a house like this," Elena said. Nate looked around, the cracked steps, the chipped paint, the old toolbox that hadn't been closed properly in a week. "This?" he asked, skeptical. She nodded. Not the place, the feeling. Quiet, safe. Nobody shouting. Her voice faded into the patter of rain. Nate felt a tug in his chest. He didn't ask questions. He just listened. "Lily sleeps through the night here," she added. "It's the first time in months." They sat in silence for a while longer, the night deepening around them. Finally, Elena rose. "I know we can't stay forever," she said, "and I wouldn't ask." "You didn't," Nate said. "And no one asked me to offer, but I did." She gave him a soft, tired smile. "Sometimes," she said, "I think broken people recognize each other faster than whole ones do, and..." With that, she went inside. Later that night, Nate lingered in the kitchen, rinsing out mugs, wiping crumbs off the table. He passed the living room and saw Lily curled up with the rabbit in her arms, Lucas's wooden truck, now painted yellow, sitting beside her on the floor. Upstairs, he stood at his bedroom window for a long while, watching the rain paint quiet, silver lines across the glass. Below, he could see the garage glowing with warm yellow light from the side room. Not long ago, that space had been filled with old parts and things he didn't need anymore. Now it held something far more difficult to name, not love. Not yet, but the first breath before the possibility of it. Nate hated mirrors. Not out of vanity. He'd never cared much for his appearance, but because mirrors told the truth. They showed the places where time had worn down the edges, the way a man's shoulders stooped when he was tired of carrying ghosts, and they always showed the scar. It stretched across the left side of his back, jagged and pale like a river frozen mid-thaw. He usually kept it hidden under shirts, jackets, anything with sleeves. But that afternoon, in the back of the garage, his shirt was tossed over a chair as he wiped sweat from his neck, unaware that Elena had come to ask a question about inventory. She froze in the doorway. Not from fear, not from shock, just from recognition. Nate turned, startled. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a grace that surprised them both, Elena stepped forward and said quietly, "You don't have to cover up." Nate reached for his shirt anyway. "It's nothing," he muttered. "No, it's not," she said, and her voice was steady, not pitiful, but "it doesn't scare me." He paused, shirt in hand, then dropped it back on the chair. The air between them changed, not heated, not tense, but stripped down, bare like skin, vulnerable like breath. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. Lucas had gone to a friend's house. Lily had fallen asleep early on the couch, a coloring book sliding off her lap. Nate stood at the sink, washing a few dishes. Elena leaned against the counter beside him, drying them one by one. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves into a gentle rustle, like whispers only the trees could understand. "Car fire," Nate said suddenly, his voice low. Elena looked at him, unsure what he meant. The scar. It was a car fire. He rinsed a plate slowly, as if each movement mattered. "My wife, Callie. She was driving back from work. Some teenager ran a red light. Gas tank ruptured." He paused. "She was alive when I got there. Barely. I tried to pull her out. Didn't care about the flames, didn't care about me, just needed her out." Elena didn't interrupt. "I got her out," he said. "But she didn't make it." He placed the plate in the drying rack. "Lucas was 5. He was at a sleepover. I didn't tell him until the next morning." Elena gently folded the dish towel in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not because she didn't know what else to say, but because sometimes those were the only words worth saying. "I kept the scar," Nate continued, "because I didn't deserve not to." Elena stepped closer. "Or maybe because you did everything a man could do for someone he loved." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw in her expression something fierce and soft at once. She wasn't offering comfort. She was offering truth. They stood in silence, the kind that wraps around two people like a heavy quilt, worn but warm. Later they sat in the living room, each with a mug in hand. The only light came from the lamp by the window and the faint orange flicker of the candle Elena had lit earlier. "I used to think," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "that scars meant you were ruined, that no one would want you after." Nate glanced over. "I married young," she continued. "Too young. He was older, clever. He knew how to make promises sound like truth. For the first year, I believed him. Then, I stopped existing." She didn't raise her voice, didn't let it crack, but the weight of her words was enough. "He never hit me. Not with his hands," she added, almost as an afterthought. "But words can bruise in places that take longer to heal." Nate didn't press, didn't pry, just let her keep going. "He told me I was weak, that no one would want a woman with a child, that I was lucky he stayed as long as he did." She exhaled through her nose. "And I believed him. Until Lily." Her voice softened when she said her daughter's name, like a light flicked on in the dark. "When she came into the world, she looked at me like I mattered. That was the first time I thought, maybe he's wrong." Nate nodded slowly. "I still hear his voice sometimes," Elena admitted. "When I get too happy, too safe. It whispers that I'm selfish, that I'm pretending, that I'll ruin anything good." "You haven't ruined anything here," Nate said. She looked at him, searching for signs of judgment, of pity. She found none. "I still keep a bag packed," she said quietly, "just in case I need to disappear." He leaned forward. "Maybe it's time to unpack it." She blinked. "That simple?" "No," he said. "Not simple. But maybe worth it." When she finally stood to say goodnight, Elena paused near the doorway. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. Nate tilted his head. "What?" "The scar." He thought for a moment. "Not when I touch it," he said. Only when I remember why it's there. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Me too, she said. Then she was gone, her footsteps soft down the hallway, the click of the guest room door echoing longer than it should. Nate sat there, long after the candle flickered out. In the quiet, in the dark, with the memory of a scar still glowing faintly on his skin, and the faintest impression of a hand that didn't flinch when it touched it. There was something about morning light that felt different when you woke up with purpose. Nate stood on the back porch, a cup of coffee cradled between his hands, watching the sun crawl slowly over the tops of the pine trees. It hit the dew-dusted lawn in a hush of gold. Somewhere down the road a rooster crowed, late and confused. He smiled barely. Behind him, the house murmured with quiet life. Lily's soft singing, the shuffle of Lucas's slippers, the familiar clink of Elena moving through the kitchen, and still nothing felt loud. It all felt right-sized. For the first time in a long while, the silence in Nate's life wasn't an echo. It was a backdrop, a frame. Later that morning, Nate found Elena in the garage, sleeves rolled, hair tied up in a loose knot. She was kneeling beside an old wooden table that had been pushed into the corner. Its legs uneven and surface scratched like an animal had once fought it for dominance. "I think this thing is fixable," she said without looking up. "That old thing?" Nate chuckled. "It's been wobbling since the Clinton administration." She looked up at him, that soft smile forming. "Then it's earned the right to be made useful again." He squatted beside her. "What are you thinking?" "A family table," she said. "Not permanent, but something we can sit around for now. Meals, homework, even just silence." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "I've got clamps, sandpaper, glue. Let's see what this old soul's got left." They worked in comfortable rhythm, Elena sanding the legs while Nate reinforced the joints. Lucas came by after lunch and, without being asked, began painting one of the crossbars a soft blue. Lily joined him minutes later, dipping her tiny brush in yellow paint and dotting little suns on the corners. The table slowly transformed under their hands, still imperfect, still a little crooked, but sturdy. And beautiful in the way real things are, weathered, mended, meaningful. By the time evening came, it stood in the backyard under the old elm tree, where they set up dinner plates and mismatched chairs. The sky was painted lavender. The grass was cool beneath their feet. Dinner was spaghetti, garlic bread, and laughter. Lucas opened up just a little, telling Lily about the time he'd tried to fix Nate's lawnmower and accidentally made it smoke like a chimney. Lily squealed with delight, eyes wide as saucers. Elena laughed so hard she had to set down her fork. Nate watched them from his seat at the head of the table, the one Callie used to occupy, and let the warmth seep in slowly. He didn't speak much, but his silence wasn't from distance. It was from awe. They were rebuilding something, not from bricks, from breath, from kindness, from the decision to stay when running was easier. After dinner, Elena offered to wash the dishes inside. Nate lingered beneath the tree, watching the wind play with the leaves above him. When he stepped into the kitchen, she was humming softly, the sleeves of her shirt damp, her hands moving with ease. "You look like you belong here," he said, before he could stop himself. She glanced at him, one brow arched. "Because I'm doing your dishes?" "No," he replied. "Because it doesn't feel like the house is holding its breath anymore." Elena dried her hands and leaned back, against the counter, the towel still in her grip. "It's strange," she said. "I've never felt comfortable in a house I didn't own. But this place, these floors, the cracked windows, the way the cabinet sticks when I pull it, none of it feels borrowed." She paused. "It feels invited." That night, Lily asked Nate to read her a story. Lucas watched from the doorway, at first arms crossed, then came and sat at the foot of the bed without a word. Elena leaned on the doorframe, watching Nate read aloud from a book about a bear who didn't know how to hibernate. His voice was gravelly but warm, his delivery dry and unpolished, but Lily was rapt. Lucas cracked a small smile when the bear fell asleep mid-sentence, and Nate had to improvise a snore that made them both giggle. Afterward, as they turned off the lights and tiptoed down the hallway, Elena whispered, "She's going to remember that." "Maybe," Nate said. "No," she replied. "She will." In the living room, Nate stood in front of the fireplace staring at the empty mantel. Once it had held photos. Then for years, it held nothing. Elena joined him, mug of tea in hand. "Can I ask something?" she said. He nodded. "Do you ever feel guilty and for being okay?" The question landed with surprising weight. "I mean," she continued, "after everything, when you laugh, or feel warm. Does a part of you wonder if you've moved on too far?" Nate didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of tea, then said, "Not far, just forward." She looked at him, her eyes dark and steady. "And is that different?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Because forward still carries what was. It just doesn't sit in the same seat anymore." Elena smiled at that. A small, genuine smile. "That's a beautiful way to put it." He glanced toward the window. Outside, the table stood under the elm, now empty again. But it wasn't a lonely sight. "Maybe the trick," Nate said, "is building something that makes room for both. What's gone, and what might still come." And in the quiet that followed, neither of them said it, but both of them knew. That table, the one they'd mended together, was never just about meals. It was about choosing to stay. Even if only for now. The first sign came in the form of silence, heavier than usual, colder around the edges. It was mid-morning. Nate was under the hood of a '98 Ford Ranger, elbows deep in rust and cracked belts, when he caught sight of a dark sedan pulling slowly into the gravel lot. Not the usual type for Elmbrook, not dusty, not dented. This one gleamed, black as wet coal. The man who stepped out didn't belong here either. His shoes were too clean, his coat too pressed. He wore the kind of look Nate hadn't seen since the funeral, tight-jawed, dismissive, like the whole town was something that had stuck to his tires on the way in. Nate wiped his hands on a rag, already feeling the muscles in his neck tense. The man didn't approach him. He turned instead toward the side room, toward Elena. She had been sorting bolts in the garage bay, her hair tied back, grease on her knuckles. When she looked up and saw him, Nate saw it happen. Her face drained of color, shoulders stiffened, breath paused mid-chest. "Elena," the man said, voice smooth, too familiar. "Logan," she replied flatly. Lily, who had been coloring nearby, on a crate with Lucas, perked up at the name, but her mother stepped quickly in front of her. "What are you doing here?" Elena asked. "I came to talk, in private." "There's nothing to talk about." Logan looked around, feigning politeness. "This is where you've ended up? A garage in a town that doesn't exist on half the maps?" Nate stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" Logan turned slowly. His eyes took Nate in, boots, oil-stained shirt, scar peeking just above his collar. "And you are?" "Someone who thinks you should lower your voice." Logan gave a humorless laugh. "Cute." Elena stepped between them. "Don't," she said to Nate. "He's not worth it." Then to Logan. "Say what you came to say and then go." Logan's smile dropped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "You're making this messy, Elena. You've been avoiding court summons. That's not going to work much longer. I'm not going back. You think this shack qualifies as a stable environment for Lily?" He sneered. "The court will not side with a woman who ran, especially not one who shacked up with some grieving mechanic with a child of his own." Elena's jaw trembled, but she didn't step back. "I left to protect her. You know what you did, and you know what you said." "You have no proof," Logan replied smoothly. "And now you're just hiding. Still the drama queen, aren't you?" Nate didn't move, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Logan saw it, smirked, and stepped closer. "I'm giving you one chance," Logan said. "Come back quietly." Let Lily return to the life she deserves. Or I take this to a judge, and you lose her. He placed the folder on the workbench and turned to go. But before he reached the car, Nate said, "You know what I see?" Logan stopped, barely glancing back. "I see a man who's never had to earn love, only buy it. And you're losing your grip on the one thing money doesn't work on. Is that so?" Nate took a step forward, voice calm but edged in iron. "You can throw your folders and threats, but if you try to take that little girl from the only safe place she's ever known, you're not walking back to your shiny car. And believe me, no one in this town is calling the cops to help you." For a moment the air hung still, then Logan smiled again, soulless and cold. "Enjoy your fantasy while it lasts." He drove off without another word. The sound of tires crunching gravel faded. Slowly, Nate turned. Elena was still standing there, fists clenched, face flushed with the aftershock of adrenaline and humiliation. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I told you," she said. "I told you trouble would find me." "Trouble finds everyone," Nate replied, "but not everyone finds people who'll stand next to them when it does." Her eyes shimmered. She didn't speak. That night the house was too quiet. Lily had fallen asleep early, curled around her rabbit like she knew the world wasn't right. Lucas pretended not to notice anything, but Nate caught him glancing toward Elena's room more than once. Even the wind outside seemed to have taken on a different tone. Restless, uncertain. Elena stood by the kitchen sink, unmoving, staring out into the dark. "I should go," she said at last. "Before this gets worse." "You're not going," Nate said. "You saw what he's capable of. I saw what you're capable of. You didn't flinch." She turned. "You don't understand. I've run from this man for years, but he still finds ways to make me feel powerless, like I'm just waiting for the blow." "You're not powerless." She shook her head. "I don't want Lily to grow up always looking over her shoulder, or thinking she's the reason everything falls apart." Nate stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Then show her what it looks like when someone stands their ground. Show her that even if you're afraid, you don't disappear." Their eyes locked. Elena didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "What if I lose her anyway?" Nate's jaw tightened. "Then you lose her standing tall, not running scared." Later, that night, Nate sat in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. The folder Logan had left sat unopened on the coffee table. Nate didn't need to read it to understand what was coming. But he also understood something else. Something Logan didn't. This house, with its chipped paint and mismatched chairs, had started to breathe again. It had taken in a wounded woman and a hopeful child. It had become something real, and no man with polished shoes and a courtroom smirk could take that away. Not without a fight. The knock came just after midnight. It was soft, intentional, measured. Nate was in the kitchen, nursing, a mug of cold coffee, watching shadows stretch across the hardwood floor. He'd been unable to sleep. Not after Logan's visit, not with the image of Elena's trembling hands and Lily's quiet questions still lingering in the corners of the house. The knock came again. He stood, instinct tightening in his chest. He didn't bother with the porch light, he just opened the door. A man stood there, not Logan, taller, rougher around the edges. Hoodie pulled low, face half lit by moonlight, and something in his posture, relaxed, leaning slightly, made Nate's stomach turn. "Looking for someone?" Nate asked. The man smiled. "You Hollis?" Nate didn't answer. "I was told there's a woman staying here, Elena. Dark hair, pretty eyes, cute kid." Behind him the gravel crunched softly. Another man, less subtle, bigger, gloves on, Nate, stepped forward and pulled the door halfway shut behind him. "I think you've got the wrong place," he said. "Don't think we do," the first man replied, stepping closer. "Logan's a friend. He just wants what's his. We're just here to help things along." Nate didn't wait for the threat to finish. He lunged first. The fight wasn't clean. Nate was strong, but outnumbered. He got in a solid blow before being shoved hard into the porch rail. Wood splintered. His shoulder screamed in protest. One man tried to slip past him toward the house, toward the room where Lily slept. But Nate caught him by the jacket. yanked him back and slammed him against the wall. "Not in my house," he growled. The second man rushed him from the side and they went down hard. Nate felt a sharp crack against his ribs and knew it would bruise deep. He bit back the pain, twisted and elbowed blindly. Lights flipped on inside. He heard Elena's voice, Lily crying, Lucas yelling something, then a scream, Elena's, and her silhouette behind the screen door. "Get inside," Nate roared. But she didn't run. She burst out with a flashlight in one hand and the tire iron he kept by the workbench in the other. Her eyes were wild, filled with fear and fury, and for a split second, the men hesitated, long enough for Nate to land another blow. One attacker staggered backward. The other grabbed Elena's wrist and tried to twist the flashlight away. She swung the iron. It connected with a sickening crack. The man went down. The first one turned and ran, blood on his shirt, fear finally catching up to bravado. Tires peeled, away into the night. Silence returned, shattered only by the sound of Lily crying inside the house and Elena panting as she dropped the iron with shaking hands. Nate leaned against the porch post, breath heaving, ribs burning. "You okay?" he managed. Elena didn't speak. She just crossed the space between them and touched his face, his jaw bruised, lips split. Her fingers trembled. He touched her wrist, gently this time. "Are you?" She nodded, eyes glossy with unshed tears. "I didn't think," she whispered. When I heard them, you don't have to explain." He looked over her shoulder. Lily was clinging to Lucas on the stairs, both of them pale still, and then it hit him. What had almost happened? He pulled Elena into his arms. The hug wasn't romantic, it wasn't sweet. It was desperate, raw, gripping. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just held him tighter. Her breath hitched against his shoulder. "I thought I'd lost everything again," she whispered. "Not while I'm here," he said. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by Hazel, who had seen the shadows and heard the shouting from her upstairs window across the street. By then, the attackers were gone, but there was enough evidence, the bruises, the flashlight, the blood on the porch rail, to file a full report. Elena gave her statement with a steadiness Nate hadn't seen before. Like a woman who, for once, wasn't just surviving, but standing. "They'll be back," she said after the deputies left. "Or Logan will send someone worse." Nate's eyes narrowed. "Let him." She looked at him. He didn't flinch. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Elena stepped quietly into the living room where Nate was icing his ribs. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." She sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Nate said, "You ever wonder what it means to love someone after you've been broken?" Elena stared at the fireplace. "All the time," she whispered. "I thought I couldn't," Nate admitted. "Thought I'd sealed off that part of myself." He turned to look at her. "But tonight, when I saw them trying to get to you, to her, I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about scars, or loss, or what might happen to me. I just moved." Elena's breath caught. "I thought," Nate continued, "that love would feel like something soft, gentle. But I think for people like us it starts as something fierce, protective, unapologetic." He swallowed. "And I think I'd do it again. Even if it hurt." She reached for his hand. Not a romantic gesture. Just something true. Real. Fingers curled between fingers. Warmth through bruises. Promise made without words. The fire started just before dawn. It wasn't an explosion. No screams, no drama, just a sudden glow outside the window. Too warm, too alive. Nate had been dozing upright in the armchair, a blanket slung over his lap, when the orange flicker seeped into his sleep. His eyes opened slowly, registering the shimmer on the wall across from him. Then the smoke hit. Sharp, bitter, wrong. He was on his feet in an instant, stumbling toward the front door. When he opened it, the first thing he saw was the old garage, the storage room where Elena and Lily had been staying. Engulfed. Flames licked the sky in twisting, hungry waves, cracking wood and glass with terrifying speed. "Elena!" Nate shouted, running back into the house. She was already coming down the hallway, Lily in her arms, Lucas close behind. They all ran barefoot into the street. Neighbors emerged from doorways wrapped in coats and confusion. Hazel was already dialing the fire department from her porch, voice trembling. By the time the sirens came, the building was a skeleton. Smoke poured into the morning sky like a scream that had waited too long to be heard. Nate stood behind the caution tape an hour later, his hands black with soot, shirt scorched at the hem. The firefighters said it looked deliberate. Gasoline, trails, accelerant patterns, professional, intentional. Nate didn't need to guess who. Logan hadn't just sent a warning this time. He'd erased something, a space that had started to feel like home, a room that smelled like cinnamon and bedtime stories, a table they had repaired together, drawings Lily had taped to the wall. Gone. Elena sat on the curb, her arms wrapped tightly around Lily. The child didn't cry. She just stared at the smoke, her little rabbit pressed against her chest, singed at the ears. Lucas stood beside Nate, silent. "I should have known," Elena whispered, her voice hollow. "I should have never stayed. I brought this to you." Nate turned toward her slowly. "You brought nothing but warmth to this place." She shook her head. "I was selfish. I thought we could have a little peace. I let myself hope." "Hope is not selfish," Nate said. "And neither are you." Elena looked up. Her eyes were red, not from smoke. "What do we do now?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "We stay." She blinked. "What?" "We stay," he repeated, firmer this time. "He wants us gone. That means staying is the loudest answer we can give." Elena stared at him as if trying to measure the depth of what he was offering. Not just a roof, not just protection, but allegiance, belonging. That afternoon, Nate helped Lily gather what was left. A metal spoon, a cracked picture frame, one boot. That was it. The firefighters handed him a charred chunk of wood they'd found among the rubble. It was part of the table leg, burned, blackened, but still solid at the core. He held it in both hands. For a long time, the sheriff came by late, notebook in hand, face drawn with guilt. "We'll look into it," he said. "But you know how this works. No cameras, no direct witnesses. Lawyers'll spin it if we press too hard." Nate nodded. "Yeah, but if you want to press charges, we'll back you. People here like you. Like her." Nate glanced at the burned-out shell behind them. "She's not going anywhere." The sheriff smiled. "Good. Neither are we." That night, Elena stood in Nate's living room, Lily asleep on the couch behind her, a blanket tucked under her chin. Elena held the scorched piece of table wood in her hands. "I keep thinking about how fast it all went," she said softly. "How something we built with care just vanished in seconds." Nate looked at her. "It didn't vanish," he said. "The table burned, the room is gone. But the choosing, that stays." She frowned gently. "You chose to stay," he continued. "Even when it hurt. Even when it was easier to run, that's what matters." He reached out, his hand resting lightly over hers around the burned wood. "Fire can't touch that." Elena blinked back tears. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll start again." The next morning, the town came alive in a different way. Hazel brought coffee and blankets. The McLeans from the hardware store dropped off a toolbox and lumber. A retired builder named Theo, who'd lived down the street for 40 years, knocked on the door with a clipboard and said, "Tell me what you need." Elmbrook didn't have wealth, it didn't have luxury, but it had hands and hearts. By noon, the porch had been swept, the garage floor cleared, nails sorted, paint cans shaken. It wasn't a rebuild, it was a resurrection, and in the middle of it all stood Elena, Lily in one arm, a hammer in the other. Her eyes no longer darted to shadows. Her spine didn't bend under the weight of fear. She wasn't fleeing anymore. She was home. It started with a hammer, old, rusted, and borrowed, but it made the first sound that marked the beginning of something new. A dull thud against soft pine, echoing off the quiet morning air like a heart that had decided to keep beating. Nate stood beside Theo Barnes, the retired builder, watching as he measured and marked fresh planks with pencil and precision. "You're lucky," Theo muttered, squinting at the sunlight. "Fire missed the main frame, still got bones." Nate nodded. "So do we." Theo gave him a sideways glance and half a smile. "Good. Then let's raise something that lasts, bayou." Mid-morning, the yard had turned into something like a barn raising. Hazel showed up with pastries and coffee in mismatched mugs, insisting no one work on an empty stomach. The brothers from the lumber yard hauled beams into place like they'd been waiting years for a reason to be useful. Kids from the high school volunteered to paint. A pair of women from the church delivered a bag of second-hand curtains, folded, neatly with lavender sachets tucked inside. Elena was everywhere, sweeping, organizing, smiling, and not the kind of careful smile she used to wear like armor. This one was freer. It creased the corners of her eyes. It stayed longer after the laughter. She wore Lucas's old flannel tied at the waist, and when Nate handed her a power drill, she didn't hesitate. "I've never done this before," she said. "You've never rebuilt your life either," he said. "You're doing fine at both." Lily and Lucas sat on the porch steps watching it all unfold, their legs swinging in opposite rhythms. She leaned against him easily now, like gravity had grown between them. She said, "We'll have a new room," Lily whispered. Lucas nodded. "This one won't burn." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because everyone here saw it happen," he said, "and they came anyway." Lily didn't fully understand, but she smiled. By late afternoon, the frame was up. The new side, room was smaller, humbler, but solid. The windows had been repurposed from an old farmhouse outside town. Nate had cleaned and reglazed them himself. He and Elena stood inside the new frame, bare feet on the raw wood floor, light pouring through the glass in long golden rectangles. "Smells like sap," she murmured. "Still alive," he said. She reached for his hand, not to hold it, but to steady herself. "You ever feel like you don't deserve this much kindness?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "But it keeps coming." "Maybe that means we were wrong," he said, "about what we thought we deserved." Elena looked down at their shadows, stretched and touching across the floor. "I want to stay," she said softly. "Not because I have to, because I finally can." That evening, the town gathered for a cookout behind the garage. Nothing formal, just hot dogs, folding chairs, and the scent of wood smoke curling into the air like a hymn. Someone played guitar. A toddler danced barefoot in the grass. People laughed, not out of pity but out of presence. Hazel stood at the edge of it all, watching Nate and Elena carry a tray of plates between them. She shook her head and smiled. "Told you that chair wouldn't stay empty forever," she muttered to herself. Later, after the last of the guests left and the coals had gone cold, Nate walked with Elena beneath the stars. The night was cooler, now. A late autumn chill crept into the folds of their clothes, but neither of them minded. They stopped in the yard where Lily and Lucas had earlier helped plant something new, a young sugar maple sapling. Its trunk was no thicker than Nate's wrist, but it stood there, leaves trembling in the wind, roots tucked deep into soil that still smelled like ash. Elena crouched beside it, running her fingers gently over the bark. "This one won't be perfect," she said. The fire burned some of the soil. Nate crouched beside her. "No tree grows perfect," he said. "But they grow anyway." She looked at him. "Do we?" "We try," he said. "Together, we try." That night, as Elena tucked Lily into the makeshift bed in the living room until their new space was ready, Lily looked up at her and whispered, "Can we stay here even after it snows?" Elena smoothed her daughter's hair. feeling the catch in her own throat. "We'll be here when the snow falls," she said. "And when it melts." Lily smiled. "Then I'll draw us all in a big house again, but this time it'll have a tree outside." Elena nodded. "A promise tree." Nate sat alone for a moment after on the porch, looking out at that sapling in the moonlight. He thought of the fire, of the fear, of the anger, and then of the way everyone had shown up with their hands and their time and their faith. Faith in something you couldn't buy. Faith in starting again. He didn't hear her come out, but suddenly Elena was there sitting beside him. She didn't say a word, just leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand sliding into his. And that was enough. No grand confessions, no declarations, just two people holding on as the night cooled and the wind brushed against the promise tree outside, a tree that would take years to grow and all the right reasons to stay. Winter came late that year. Elmbrook wore it like a quiet hush, frost dusting the windows each morning, smoke curling steadily from chimneys, footsteps muffled on the streets. The sugar maple in Nate's yard had lost its last leaf weeks ago, but its trunk stood straighter now, firm in the ground, its roots learning to hold. The rebuilt room beside the garage was finished. Not grand, not new, but it was theirs. Wooden. Beams painted soft white, curtains Elena had sewn herself, and a quilt Hazel had made from scraps gathered around town. A bookshelf stood against the far wall, filled with Lily's picture books and a few of Lucas's dog-eared mysteries. A framed photograph sat on the windowsill. Lily and Lucas, both grinning, their heads pressed close. There was no plaque, no title, no official deed, but everyone in town knew it was their home. That morning, sunlight filtered through the front window of the cafe, washing the wooden floors in gold. Nate sat in his usual seat at Hazel's hearth, now slightly closer to the window than before. The chair across from him was no longer empty. Elena sat across, fingers curled around her mug of tea. Her smile wasn't wide, but full, like something earned, not given. She wore Nate's old denim jacket, oversized, frayed at the sleeves and more hers than his now. They didn't talk much. They never needed to. Outside, Lucas was teaching Lily how to balance on the edge of the sidewalk, one foot in front of the other, arms stretched out like wings. Hazel refilled their mugs with a wink. "Told you you'd fill that seat again." Nate didn't deny it. Later that afternoon, Elena stood in front of the fireplace at home, watching the flame flicker behind the glass screen. The new table stood proudly in the center of the living room, a little crooked still with paint smudges in the corners and 4 mismatched chairs pulled close. She turned when she heard footsteps. Nate stood in the doorway, holding something, behind his back. She arched a brow. "You're not proposing, are you?" He smirked. "Too early for that." He handed her a small wooden sign, smooth and simple. On it, carved by hand, "The Second Cup." She looked at him. "For the cafe," he said. "Thought maybe we'd rename it." She touched the letters slowly, her fingers tracing each groove. "Why Second Cup?" "Because the first one might have been lost, or spilled, or stolen," he said. "But we don't always get to choose the first. We do get to choose the second." Elena swallowed hard. "And you'd want to run it with me?" "No," Nate said. "I want to build it with you." She didn't kiss him. She just stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest, her hands against his ribs, the same ribs still sore from when he fought for her, the same ribs now steady beneath her palms. He wrapped his arms around her and they stayed like that a long time. That evening, they planted a second tree beside the first, a gift from Theo, who said every house needed a pair of something living. It was a flowering dogwood, small and delicate, its roots tender. Lily tied a red ribbon around the base. Lucas helped steady it with stones. "I think it needs a name," Lily declared. "Promise tree," Elena whispered. Nate nodded. "Then let's keep our promises." As night fell, Nate found himself once more in the living room, the fire crackling, the warmth of cinnamon and pine in the air. The rebuilt bookshelf glowed beneath the light. Lucas sat on the floor sketching something new. A house with 2 chimneys, 4 windows, 2 trees. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch again, rabbit tucked under her chin. Elena sat by the window. The same window Nate had looked through for years, watching the world keep turning without him. He walked over and sat beside her, outside. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall, soft as dust, quiet as forgiveness. They didn't say anything, but after a while, Elena slipped her hand into his. "I still think about leaving sometimes," she said. "I do too," Nate answered. "But we're still here." "Yes," he said, "and maybe we'll stay tomorrow too." She looked at him, and in her eyes was everything they didn't need to say out loud. A choice. A vow. Not forever, but today. Outside, the wind moved gently through the bare branches, brushing past the 2 small trees that stood near the porch, silent, steadfast, growing quietly through the cold. And inside the window, 2 chairs stood side by side, no longer empty. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's the moment someone chooses to stay. Through the storm, through the fire, through the fear. If this story touched something quiet in your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to rebuild, then please consider tapping like and subscribe. Here, we tell stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Because sometimes, the softest moments speak the loudest.